I'm Carla Kopp from Weird Giraffe Games. I'm a designer, developer, publisher, whatever. But more importantly, we have Kathleen Mercury here, who does a lot of things, and she's going to be our guest for this game design live chat.
Yay!
So we'll start off and we'll have Kathleen introduce herself, and then we can go around and everyone can introduce themselves as well. And then we'll go into a kind of Q&A session. There was a lot of questions given on the Discord, but if anyone wants to ask a question because of Kathleen will say something fantastic, obviously that's why she's here. Just you could either say it in the little chat thing if you like text, or you could just say it if you are fine saying it. So yeah. So Kathleen.
Oh, well, thank you. My name is Kathleen Mercury. It is my real last name. I found out when I got divorced that whatever you tell the judge, what you want your name to be is what your name becomes. So I picked it, and there's a whole story behind it. But yeah, I teach middle school gifted kids in St. Louis, Missouri, and because I can basically teach what I want, how I want, I started teaching game design 12, 13 something years ago. And because I hate the expression, those who can't do teach, I started designing games too, because why not? I mean, it's fun. And so I now have 2 titles signed. One with Colossal and another that just got signed this week with WizKids. And I've got a 3rd game that's showing really well, so I'm excited about that one. And so yeah, so I do a podcast myself, Games in Schools and Libraries, Board Game Broads I've been on, also on board games. And most importantly for me is I share all of my game design teaching resources for free at KathleenMercury.com. So if there are people who want to teach games or game design, literally my whole Google Drive of materials is basically somewhat organized on the website for people to use, make their own copies of, and just go to town. So that's what I do.
So now if anyone else wants to say who they are and what game they're working on or anything like that.
I'm Ananda. I'm actively working on 4 different games, and I have a bunch of others that I've put off for a bit. The one that I'm focused on right now is a word game. Yeah.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Matt Williams in Columbus, and with Steam Kitty Games, and I've been working on some games with otters.
Oh, cool.
I'm Charlie McKieran. My main game I'm working on right now is called Four Humors.
Nice.
It's a little bit of a bluffing game. So. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And I'm Maddie Schrader. I'm a hobbyist board game designer. I'm currently working on a hacking-themed game about white hat hacking.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and cool. Charlie said that your website landing page is amazing.
Oh,
so,
thanks.
Great job.
Thanks. I mean, I use a template, but it is, there's 2 of my favorite pictures. One when I was in New Zealand in Rivendell, and I got to even wear like a little cloak and have a sword. And the thing that makes me mad about that one is I didn't take my shoes off and go full Hobbit. But then at the very bottom of the page is it's the Glenfinnan Viaduct Bridge, which they filmed in Harry Potter with the Hogwarts Express going across. And so there was one day where some friends who were Scottish when I was there, they took me to see this, and we realized, because all these people were waiting around, and we found out that the train was going to come across the bridge. So I got to see the Hogwarts Express like cross that bridge, which was exciting. But more importantly, it also meant that I got to go train spotting in Scotland, which of course really means like hunting heroin. But it was just enough for me to say that I was train spotting in Scotland, not heroin. No, don't touch the stuff.
Okay, so on the heroin note, we had some questions that were submitted earlier. And the first one is, what are some of the benefits to making lots of different prototypes instead of iterating on one design like repeatedly?
Well, so a lot of what I've done in teaching has been really focused on multiple iterations of the design cycle. And the thing that I have found over the years with my students, I've teach 7th grade students, and they all take this game design class when they're in 7th grade in our gifted program. So they don't get to choose it. And so I have kids who don't like games who have to design a game. I have kids who don't like games who have to do multiple iterations of a game. And so if a kid doesn't like their game, if they don't feel successful with it, multiple iterations can just feel like they're kind of just grinding their wheels in the mud a bit. And games do get better with multiple iterations. But the thing that sort of shifted my mind is my good friend John Brieger is a designer and professional developer. And one of the things that he told me about one time was in one of his college design classes, he had a professor who did an experiment. He had one group of kids focus on 2 projects for the whole semester to, spend a lot of time and do them really, really well. And then he had another class where he just had them do a lot of different projects. And what he found was the quality of the work at the end was better with the group that did multiple projects because the design process stayed fresh for them, that they got lots of different types of experiences. They never ran into that, like, it's not working, I don't know what to do, that kind of like you're stuck. Because the other thing too is, in the real world, if I'm stuck on a game, I can put it off to the side, come back in a few days, a week, a month, whatever. When I have my students doing this, like, we are on a schedule. We have to get things done. You have to be creative, like right now, to solve this problem. And so in having students design multiple game projects and working on them, I definitely saw a different feel to the classroom as far as like the approach, like, oh, what are we going to do next? What's my next sort of challenge? And the idea that just, like exercise different design muscles. I mean, if we had gone back to school after spring break, which we did not, then I would have had them do roll and write games, like any type of, a roll and write, or even like a roll in place where you roll the dice and place them, but really playing around with dice and probability, which is something that I've always, always, always minimized in the rest of their projects because, like emphasize player choice, minimal luck, so just a whole totally different way of approaching it. And I think, especially as a designer, the more experiences you get, the better you get at them, the easier it starts to come. I mean, I definitely still struggle in a lot of ways, but definitely it's like, not practice makes perfect, but, practice helps you really develop your craft. And if nothing else, if you're not sure what to do with a game, put it down and just start something else.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I have nothing to add to that.
So yeah.
So what are some tips you have to get started quickly making a bunch of different games?
Well, I'm, out of good, fast, and cheap, the productivity triangle, I'm definitely a fast and cheap girl. Just kidding. But sorry. See, like I'm starting with jokes about heroin. Now I'm doing that. Oh my God. Okay, back, focus. So what was the question? Oh, fast and cheap, right? So anyway, so I am a fast and cheap designer. So good ideas, like what the most important thing to avoid is ideas becoming precious. When it's so hard to kill a sacred cow. It is so hard to kill your darlings. It is so hard to take something out that really can't and shouldn't be there. So for example, my game with Colossal is a fantasy-based dexterity game. So I always joke that it's Flick 'em Up beats Gloomhaven. And but the thing is it used to be bird themed. And you had pigeons dropping poop cubes onto people in cars to try to hit the most points. But then when everyone had their pigeon turns were done, then everyone got a falcon turn because falcons eat pigeons. And there was a long rod that you would slide down the falcon and just smash each other's pigeons off the buildings. And I mean, I love the theme. I still love the original idea, but the decision was made to retheme it to dragons. And now that's where the whole fantasy, world comes in. And so there's definitely, the game has grown and expanded. It's like 4th generation from like the game I signed. This is so far down the right. It's almost like a totally different game at this point. But I had an action in the game that I really loved. In the pigeon game, it was mating. And basically, if all my pigeons were spread out, or if I didn't have many pigeons left, if my pigeon was next to somebody else's pigeon, I would give one of my pigeons to another player who my pigeon was next to, and they would shake them up in their hands. And then as the active player would reach in their hand and pull out a bird. And, 50-50, it's genetics, right? Like I would get my bird to put on the board. But what I really loved about it was that I actually had players physically touching each other during the mating action, like I just thought that was so funny. And, but it was one of those things where it didn't really make sense in the dragon game, and it kind of slowed it down a little bit. And I was okay with it, but they really weren't. And it was one of those things where that was probably my first decision with a game that I made in dealing with a publisher or someone else where like it was presented to me as you should take this out, and not in a like, hey, maybe consider, but it was like, no, this really shouldn't be there. And that's really hard to do. But it made it a better game, honestly, and it paved the way to me being open to all the other changes that had to come as a result. So when ideas are precious, we like to hold on to them. So when I do all of my prototyping, I'd make all of my cards. I have a blank card template in Google Docs. I do all my art in Google Drawings. I do all my writing in Google Docs. You know what I mean? Like, I don't do anything that is pretty or good. There's a lot of tools I probably should use. I don't use, like Nandeck and all kinds of other stuff. Like, I just don't. I just slap things together as fast as I can, just to try to get them on the table as fast as I can.
I really like that. The whole fact that like if you make something that doesn't look good, then it's so much easier to get rid of it. Like, well, especially because you don't take a lot of time on it. There's not a lot invested, so you can easily change it and you don't have feelings attached. Yeah,
well, and I used to give my students about 3 weeks to make their first game prototype, you know, because, you know, out of good, fast, and cheap, I was wanting them to be good. And the problem is they weren't good. But then they had these games that weren't good, and they'd spent all this time on, and they were beautiful in many cases. And they didn't want to put the work aside, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't either, you know. And so now I give them about 3 days to make an incomplete, you know, proof of concept, just to get something on the board. And their games are so much better now because of that rush to just get it on the board, get it tested, get feedback, and then the game is afoot. You know, we're off from there. Just once they get that initial game on the table, that initial bit of feedback, they get the idea of what we're doing, and then it just paves the way for the rest of the semester.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the whole like getting it to the table as fast as possible. Like, I realized when I was beginning game designing, I would try to get like all the things ready and then get it to the table. But then I've started to just like, you know, as fast as possible, like start putting things down, like get like an outline of a card instead of like getting all the cards done, get like 1 or 2 and start playing with them, because like as soon as I put it on the table, I realize, oh, I need like these other things. I don't have an aspect to it. Like it won't work. But instead of making 50 cards, I only made 2 cards, and then I realized that I needed, you know, all the different things.
Right. Yeah. But if a game doesn't work with 20 cards, then and you think you need 100 cards for it, then if you can get it to fail with 20, or if you can get it to work with 20, that's a really good indicator of what, you know, how you should be spending your time after that.
One thing that kind of helped me with that as well is like having like a toolbox of just random components and stuff and cards of different sizes and everything. Because then you don't get if you only got like blue dice, you're going to get attached to those blue dice real quick because you can't swap them in for anything else. So I was able to kind of like rapidly prototype stuff once I had that kind of toolbox of like different size cards and generic stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I really put this idea like to test when Tabletop Network this year, right before, it was a couple days before BGGCon, and I ran a game design workshop, and originally I was going to have an hour and a half, and then because of schedule changes, then it got nipped down to 45 minutes, but because there was no breaks built into the schedule, basically 40 minutes to do a game design workshop. And so I ended up doing, basically giving people 10 minutes, 3 10-minute periods, each design a different game. So for each 10-minute period, I gave them all the components that they would have to work with and presented them with the challenge, and it was go. And it was absolutely like an exercise in, you don't have time to think about it. You just have to start doing things. Because that's one of the things too, especially when it comes to design and design mindsets, is the idea of like bias towards action. You can sit there and think about it, or you can just start doing. The best answer is to start doing, because you're going to be thinking anyway. But then the faster you just start to like cycle through and, you know, get to where, you know, you think the game is taking you. And what was really gratifying was the number of published designers that were there in that session, like really big names were there taking part. And the number of people that came to when we were talking about it afterwards, about how at least one of those games, they came up with something that they still wanted to keep working on. And these are people who I was just thrilled to meet myself. And then so for them to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad to meet you. This was so good. This was so fun. It was really cool. So I can tell you about them real quick. Basically, one was called This Race Games in the Bag, where I gave them a paper bag. They had 5 different sets of 10 wooden bits. They're all from Stone Mayer Games because my friend did their parts replacement, gave me 10. And so basically they had those bits. They had 50 bits and a paper bag, and they had to make a race game. And I like using race games a lot in game design workshops because especially for kids, most kid games are race games, from Sorry to Candyland, all that other stuff. So they're familiar with it. And the goal and the objective is be the first to cross the line. So for my students, all they have to focus on is how are they going to get there. So by giving people the paper bag that they could use for the game, as far as like some people cut it up, some people cut off the top of the bag to make it like a container or holder. One woman laid it on its side, so it was like a 3-dimensional terrain. But basically, people had 10 minutes to come up with something. And then the next one was an IP challenge, because oftentimes if you're working with IPs, you may not get the IP you love. I mean, Rob Davio talked about, somebody had to design My Little Pony Life, and in his case, it was him, not necessarily what he wanted, but you've got to put, soup on the table. So I showed a commercial from the 1970s McDonald Land creatures, it's kind of nightmarish if you've ever seen it. And I gave him a 2-page dossier on all the McDonald Land characters. And it's basically McDonald wants to be hip and cool, like Burger King, has done video games. Wendy's just did their RPG. And Burger King wants a hip, cool, buzzworthy game. And I gave everybody 2 sheets of cardstock, because the idea was that it was going to be a flat pack promo. And this is the only components you have. So the more you use of this cardstock for like a board, the less you have for bits or cards or components. And it was really interesting because for the first challenge, like the noise and energy level was here. And then when I gave them that challenge, it was just like, whoa. I mean, people are just like thrown by it. But that was really, really good, because it's a whole totally different way of thinking about how can I get this to appeal to McDonald's? How can I appeal to get this to, make this a buzzworthy kind of thing? And those are things you have to think about. That's, people think, oh, is it mechanics or theme first? No, sometimes it's very specific, constraints that are nothing to do with those. And then the third one that I had was an emotion challenge. And so with that one, I gave everybody 18 cards, and some people got little 2x2 cards. Some people got, hexes, but I had all these random sizes of cards in my classroom. So I bagged them all up in sets of 18. And I told everybody, I just had everybody yell out emotions. And the one I picked was rage. I was like, cool, come up with a game that makes people feel rage. Like, so there was like the player experience challenge. And so there were a lot of dexterity games, but one girl had this like nihilistic, like, stuff falling down game where you literally could never ever win. You could just spend your time like trying to like deal with things as things would just keep falling and falling and falling, would never win, and generate rage that way. But that was just another way to think about like the player experience. But the thing that, especially when you only have 10 minutes and you've got to come up with something, like that McDonald's one, like stump people, but that's okay. You know what I mean? It's like, how can you, like, when you're just not inspired or when you're stuck, like, how do you like, scoosh it out? So it was really fun, super, super fun. And I think if I ever do, like, if I do game workshops, designs like this, I love the 10-minute approach. Love it.
So like, I thought that was really awesome. Like, I've never really thought about game design from like the whole audience perspective, really. Like usually I design games like for me, but thinking about like what is the audience for this game, like it's certainly like if you are designing a game for a 4-year-old, like that's a completely different game than for a 10-year-old or for an adult. Like and the important part about that is all the constraints. Like you throw away, like you can't have like a bunch of math in a game for 4-year-olds and stuff like that. So like when you're doing all the constraining, it makes things so much easier because you don't have to think about half the world anymore, like getting rid of all that.
Yeah. And having like a really clear idea of who your audience is another whole way. Cause I mean, like there's the horror of the blank sheet of paper. Like, what am I going to do? Like, I want to make up a game today. Where am I going to start? And the more I'm a big fan of design constraints. I'll never ever say, I've been to game design workshops where people are like, here's a bunch of stuff, go make a game. It doesn't matter what it is. And it's just so frustrating because it's like, there's 18,000 things I could do. You know what I mean? But if you say, make it about werewolves who like to use forks when they're eating spaghetti, I got it. Like, I'm on it. You know what I mean? So I'm a big design constraint person. So that's why I like to give them.
So one of my favorite things with design constraints, I have the Fail Faster journal now, where one of the pages in the Fail Faster journal is like, it has a dice and you can get a mechanic, a theme, and some constraint. And you just roll 2 dice and then it'll give you like all those 3 things, and you can just make a game based off of that.
Yeah.
And that's been like really helpful. Like I just sit down with somebody and I'm like, here, roll these dice and we're going to make this game. And like, if you have to deal with all those 3 things, like it's so much easier because of the constraints. Do you have anything like that that you use, or like to just generate constraints or give them to you?
No, honestly, if I'm making a game sort of by myself, it's usually, you know, so either it makes me laugh, or it's something that, see, my game Valkyrie, that one came because I was asked to make a game about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And that was an interesting one, because how do you make a game about someone's life, especially if they're still alive? Do you make it about her whole life and all the different obstacles she faced? Do you make it like Ruth versus the patriarchy? I mean, like, where's the thing? And there are a couple, so there are a couple things that, you know, like decisions that it points that for myself, I had to make. One, everybody gets to be Ruth, because everybody wants to be Ruth. So to not be Ruth would not be fun for me, you know? I'd be like, well, I mean, I'm, you know, like it's cool that I'm Sandra Day O'Connor, I guess, but really I want to be Ruth, you know? So everybody got to be Ruth. And then the other thing that I wanted to do was I took the approach then of showing, of like basically hitting different landmarks in her life. But the one thing that I wanted to do was to show how the path for women was never a straight line. And if you know anything about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that woman is a Viking. You know, when she was accepted to Yale Law School, the dean sat them all down. Was it Yale or Yale? Harvard? Yale. Sorry, Ruth. I'm a little fuzzy. But anyway, it's been a while. Anyway, but he sat them all down, her and the other 8 women that were in the class. And he asked them all to justify why they got that spot over a man. And there were just so many other things in every aspect of her life where she just had this extra layer of, you know, work and labor attached to whatever she did because of her being a woman. So I wanted to show that the path for women was never straight. And because this game was meant to be sort of mass market, but had to appeal to gamers too, I decided to do a tile laying game where you move along little pathways, because that's something that is familiar to gamers, but it's accessible enough to new gamers. And then I came up with a new style of tile, or at least new to me. I don't know if it exists anywhere else, but basically every tile has 2 diagonals and a straight line on it. So that as you're laying down tiles, you can't just go to like law school. You know, you have to, fighter jet, you have to like, you know, like work your way around it and stuff like that. And then it created all kinds of interesting things. So the game ended up not getting picked up by the publisher, which was fine. The game that's in Target right now is what they went with instead. I still like mine better. But on the positive side, though, it led me to having these tiles, wanting something really female forward, wanting something that was like, you know, just not sure what I wanted to do. But then I had this idea a long time ago about Valkyries and clearing the battlefields. And I just love that idea. And I love the idea of Valkyries themselves. And so it didn't take very long at all. Like I had these tiles, I had that kind of foundation, and then boom, you know, like it all just came together. But then that was 100% like a design constraint where it's like, I didn't know where I was going to start from. And you just like, how do I find the game in this? Like, where is the game? Where is the game? And so, because I just remember too, when I first started playing games, I played the tile laying game Maori. It's a Rio Grande game. And I just remember, and it's like a super pleasant, chill, you know, there's no like take that or anything. You're just building a tableau of islands. But I just remember thinking, my God, if you can make a game about this, you can make a game about anything. So if you can make a game about Ruth Bader Ginsburg or islands in the South Pacific, like you can make a game about anything. It's just, you know, and it's fun to try to find it, you know. So what I like now is I like a lot of visual languages, like the international signal code, like the ships use. I think that's really interesting. I like heraldry and the layering of shields with all the blazonry and all the different components and how they fit together. So like a lot of what I have now, like sort of like kicking around in the back of my head, are things like that, where it's like taking this sort of visual language and then how do I make a game out of that? So that's where I'm at now. I'm a talker.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying it a lot. I'm trying to give like a space for other people to talk if they have questions or anything like that.
Ask me anything. I'll make up a good answer.
What's the average airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
You know, what's funny is I have, I went back to clean up my classroom yesterday. I'm about 3 hours from home at my family's lake house here. And I had to go in my classroom to clean it all up and pack it up, which was weird and surreal because, you know, it's still April. But then I ended up going home, and I did get my little envelope of all my like DVDs that I haven't watched in years, because who doesn't? But here I have a DVD player. And so my Monty Python and the Holy Grail disc was in there. So that's one that's going to make it. So it's been a while. I can't give you the exact answer, but you know. But I'm excited to revisit that soon. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I've been pretty lucky as far as game design goes, you know, like with this game here, this is like Valkyrie is my like third game, and that one's going to find a home, you know, so I'm like batting kind of 3 for 3, but I don't do, I mean, it doesn't take much for me to abandon a game idea at all, you know? So I have a whole like file of like ideas that I kind of start kicking around with, but it really has to like, I have to really find that hook that gets me, you know? So I guess I mean, lucky in some ways that I've been able to make things work that, you know, that I've like cared enough to really become invested in. Like, woe to the day that I have a game that I love more than anything and nobody else does. But you know, I've also been fortunate, especially with groups like Board Game Broads, to meet a lot of people in the industry, like Peggy Brown, who's had like 200 something games. Like, no game is precious to her. Her is product. You know, get it signed, sell it, move on to the next one. Like none of her babies are precious. And I think that's an important thing to remember sometimes too, is like, as much as you love something and put your heart and soul in it, at the end of the day, it's a product. I mean, there's changes that are going to happen to the game I just signed, because they have to make it a product that works for them. So I can be like, say, no, it must be this pure expression of this thematic ideal, or, you know, it's got to be something that will sell for you and work well as a game. So, okay, you know.
I really once you I really agree about the whole product thing. Like, I am a publisher, so I have to think about the product, but it is sometimes really sad when I like I'm also a gamer, but I want the game to sell to a certain audience, and that audience is not me.
Right.
So like reminding myself that I am not everyone. Like there's a lot of different like likes and like different cognitive loads and stuff like that. That makes the choices a lot easier. And like always referencing like, okay, well, I really like this aspect of the game, but what would the audience like? Like, what is the audience for this game? And like, it makes making choices a lot easier. Like in Tumbletown, I had every card back was different. And that was like so fun for me, because every time I played, even though I played like 100 times, each game was so different because every card back was different. But I ended up taking out that aspect of the game, because for somebody new coming in, every card back was different, so they had to learn, and like somebody would make a choice and take a card, and then the card would flip, so now they get a new choice based off of like, well, because they would be able to take a card from a row and also get the effect on the card back. But that was a lot of cognitive load, so like even though to me like that was like, whoa, I like heavier games, I had to make a lighter game. But yeah, just being able to take yourself back and just think, you know, what does the audience want? Because this is a product. This is not your child.
Right. And that's the hardest thing, you know, is the better that you are at envisioning other people's responses, the better of a designer you will be. Because like there are times when, you know, I put something on the table, and I made this one dice game, and it was meant to be a late night party game, and it was incredibly vulgar, incredibly so. I thought the idea of it was funny. And this one guy, when I started explaining the game, and I was with a bunch of friends, and they were laughing, they were going to do like, whatever, sure, you know. And this is years ago, like probably 10 years ago, when I was first starting to like kick around with game design stuff. And this guy is like, I'm not staying up late for this bullshit, and picked up the player aid, threw it at me, and like stomped off. And I mean, needless to say, you know, we did not stay friends after that one, because it's like, you don't have to play it, dude. You'll be rude about it. But, you know, but the thing is it was a good reminder that there are definitely some things that people just, you know, like, they're just, you know, you have to keep that in mind, both in terms of like there was the type of game I was asking him to play, but also thematically, and he didn't like either aspect of it, or at least it doesn't matter, you know, whatever he didn't like about it, he didn't like it. And so that was and that's fine. You know, he was the wrong person for it. But, you know, having that clear sense of who you're designing for, or being able to predict how will people react if I give them this type of choice. I mean, that's why I rely so heavily on like playtesting and feedback, because I feel like I'm really bad at like anticipating people, and I'm not like a mathematical person. I don't have this all crunched out as far as balance, where I know like how the different combinations or whatever will impact each other. I'm not like that, you know, because I do things that are more like, you know, just, yeah. So, I mean, yeah. So it's the more you can put yourself in the position of other people, the better your game and your rule books will be. I'll say that. Do I have any sort of system or checklist for the progress of a game to get it from idea to produced? Not really. The one thing that I definitely do is, well, one, when I teach, and I teach game design, I have kids in my classroom every day at lunch. I have a board game club that meets after school for an hour or so. And then a lot of my friends are into gaming, you know, so I'm able to get playtests done, especially with my students. My students are by far my number one source of playtesting. But the other thing too is I'm really lucky in that I know a lot of people in the gaming industry, and being a teacher, I have the summers off. So I go to a lot of game conventions, obviously in normal times. And so the nice thing about knowing lots of people in the industry and being friends with people is I can say, hey, I've got this game idea. Will you play test it? Just give me your thoughts. You know, we don't play the whole thing. And a lot of people, especially, you know, are really, really, you know, cool about doing that. And so lots of times if I don't have time to do like 40 play tests or 100 play tests, then I just try to get like as high quality ones as possible. And so I would definitely say, if you're really wanting to get published and get in the industry, going to game conventions is such a critical aspect of it. The game industry is so small. Like you can just meet people so easily. You're like, whoa, that person designed that. Like she did that. What, you know? And I had no idea. I didn't expect it to be as small as it is. And people are incredibly helpful. They're incredibly collaborative. You know, I would say don't be gross. You know, if you've not met somebody, don't be like, hey, I want you to play my prototype. You know, like build relationships, make some friends, you know. But that's the one thing, especially as far as that goes. Because the thing is, like, because I've had people then, you know, who've known my games, who have advocated for me and my games to various people, like, you should really consider this. This is actually pretty cool, and you should take a look. And that also helps too. So especially, so if you don't go that route, you know, as far as like the, you know, like progress from a game, or to get it to the point where Valkyrie came together so quickly in a couple of months, which for me is lightning fast. Came together so quickly as far as like from something that I had, like an idea I had, but since I had the cards and boom, like the game came together, and I realized, like, you know, even after like 2 months, I'm like, I can show this, like, this is ready. It's rough, but there's enough there that if somebody was interested, you know, like we could take it somewhere. So, I don't really have a system. It's like a gut sense. Carla and I were talking about this the other day about like, when as a publisher do you know if something's a good fit for you or not a good fit for you? And, you know, and a lot of it is just like, you know, kind of like, well, I think it's done. Feels like it's done, I guess. You know, you just have to kind of make that call.
Well, and like going further on that, like I've signed one game where it was like the very first play test of it, and like it obviously wasn't done. But I liked the designer enough, and I liked the idea that I was like, hey, this won't get like published this year, but I want to sign it. It'll probably get published in a year or two, and like it's obviously not done, but I want to work on it with you. Yeah. So like just because a game, like you shouldn't wait until a game is like done to show to a publisher, because you could have like play tested and iterated on it enough to make it outside the wheelhouse of other people, like like made the audience so small.
Yeah. Well, and also too, because then, like we said earlier, like the more precious your games become, then the less likely you are to like want to change it, because no, this is what I've been doing for the last 6 years on this game, you know. And it's like, trust me, if I had to kill the mating action, you know, in Dirty Birdie, then, you know, like what else are we going to do? Okay, fine. You know, I mean, even for my most recent one, the one that I've got a week and a half to get the files to the publisher so they can start working on them to get hopefully the game out in Q1 of next year, which is like blisteringly fast. you know, like we had to talk to basically make sure we were on the same page about everything that I'm going to give to them. And there are definitely things, especially with this time, you know, time schedule. It's like, what hills am I going to die on? I'm going to die on these hills. You don't like this? Fine, we'll change it. Cool, no problem. You know, because you just like, and the one thing too is this was probably the first time as a designer I've done the most pushback on a game as far as being like, yeah, that sounds cool. That sounds cool. Because generally speaking, I'm pretty agreeable on things. Like, I don't believe anything is perfect. I don't believe that there's only one way for something to be. And I will always consider the best, most important ideas I've ever had in games to be the ones that other people have told me through playtesting. Like when they pointed out something that's so obvious to me. So I'm okay with a lot of changes, but there are definitely things that they came back with where I said, you know, that changes the game. Like, from what is now like more player versus player to more player versus board. And this isn't a little change that you're wanting me to make here. This is substantially redoing the whole game. And I don't think this is what the game is. And they eventually they were like, okay. So I was like, all right, you know, so that was cool. That felt good to, you know, defend the game. But I felt like, you know, because I've worked on this game for so long through so many different iterations, a lot of their ideas they were suggesting, a lot of ideas I knew what would be the impact of them because I've played this game so much and I've play tested it so much and I know it so well. And so I was able to basically really argue for what the game is and what it needs to be. And hopefully I'm right. You know, hopefully people like it. So we'll see.
Yep. I always like it when a designer like actually tries to cooperate or like work together. Because like if a designer is just like, oh, okay, I'll do whatever you want, it's like, no, I can just design a game if I want. No, like talking back and forth.
Well, and I think too, also, if they had questions on the game before, you know, when they play tested it and they didn't necessarily understand why some things were happening, I mean, that's an important experience. If you don't understand why something's happening, it doesn't matter what my intent is. All that matters is what's on the table. But we've discovered in the course of this conversation that they had misread a couple rules that I can see why you thought that, because that was not correct. But also, you know, in terms of arguing more persuasively for it, just illuminated, you know, where there were some things they hadn't thought of. But the other thing too is, with all the feedback they gave me, because after what I thought was submitting to them my final version of the game, and they came back with 5 pages, single spaced of feedback, and like ideas to try and all kinds of other stuff. And, you know, but the thing is it still made me listen to why, you know, if there's 5 pages of feedback, like there's some sort of issue. And we were able to more or less narrow down to the feeling that they didn't feel like players had. And then I was able to translate that into the changes to the game that needed to be made, so that now when we had the conversation about here's what I did to address your concerns, I didn't do any of these other little fiddly things that you wanted me to do in the game. I mean, I tried some of them. I've already tried some of them, whatever. But this is what you wanted. This is how I'm building this into the existing game. And they were like, yes, okay. You know, and I think that's kind of like the best possible, you know, answer, hopefully, you know, when it comes to like working with a publisher, when they have an idea of the product that they want, and you as a designer are able to work with them to make the game to be what is something that you're both okay with, you know, because honestly, it's making me explore some different areas with the game that should have probably been in there all along. I mean, putting them in at the 11th hour is a little nutty, but on the other hand, I think it's the right decision, and I'm confident enough in the game and the way it's going to hold together, hopefully, that it should work.
So Jennifer asked, how early do you start playtesting?
As soon as possible. As soon as possible. Yeah, just because, and as soon as possible can vary. I mean, like I don't, you know, I teach, and that's pretty intensive, generally speaking. Now it's weird, but we're not going to worry about that. You know, so when it comes to getting an idea on the table, I mean, I usually have it to be, you know, like I like to like think on things, let it cook, think on things, let it cook. But like when it's ready for me to make a prototype, you know, I mean, I always play test with myself first. And that's the least stressful play testing that you can have. You should always play test with yourself first, you know, just to like get a sense of what is this like on the table? What does it feel like? What are the player turns and all that other stuff? But I mean, as soon as you can try out an idea, the better. I think one thing that too, also like as a woman, you know, if I'm play testing games, I mean, there's always moments where it's like people direct questions to like my boyfriend instead of me, you know, like those kinds of things, you know, whatever. But, or like, oh, you're the designer. Like, yeah, I am. But the other thing is like, I always have to make sure, I don't know if I have to, but I do. that I basically say, like, you will not hurt my feelings. This game has problems. I will not know what these problems are unless you tell me about them. So the more problems you identify for me, the sooner I can get to fixing them, you know? And I don't know that other people, I don't know that guys have to necessarily feel that they need to like set the stage for people in terms of how you want feedback. I mean, I think it's always a good idea to have some idea of like, what's the feedback you want? And, you know, what in particular am I looking at? Like, you should always have that, but especially just to make sure that they understand, like, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Like, as a person, as a woman, doing this, because all I care about is making a really fun game. And if you can help me get there, that's awesome. And that's all I care about. That's, you know, you will hurt my feelings if you don't take me seriously and you just say, oh, it's great. It's really great. It's great. That's annoying.
Yeah. Well, I also do the same thing. I even started off like, usually when I ask people to play test, I'm like, hey, do you want to play like a really bad game? Like, you can help make it better. Because like, I know like it's not like if you're play testing one of my games, it's not as good as it can be. It could be better. So help me. And like, if I'm very upfront with like, hey, this isn't a published game, like you're not going to have as much fun as if you just like took something off the shelf. Like, hey, this is bad, but it can get better. So let's do this together.
Right. And I think that's, and the funny thing is, like, for me, I love playing prototypes because people get real fussy if you're playing a published game and you start fussing about different aspects of it. They're like, can we just play the game? Do you have to like tear apart everything? And I'm not always right. But this is me. I just like to like, how do things work? And I just like to like, you know, play with things and what would happen if we do this? And what would happen if we do this? You know, and people get really annoyed when you do that in a published game, but not when you do prototypes. People are like, yes, tell me where the problems are. I'm like, okay, I will, you know? So I get to complain when I play prototypes, but that's the thing though, is I want people to complain when they play mine. Like when somebody's like, this is not working, I'm like, go on, tell me, you know? So it's not me. I don't take it personally. You know, it's the work, it's the game on the table. And if there's problems with it, I want to know. So.
So Connor asked, how do you decide what game ideas to give up on early? Do you have some examples of ideas you were really excited about, but then had to scrap?
Yeah, I had this idea, and I usually like things have to make me laugh a little bit. A lot of times for me to be super interested in them, and usually like I have to have. So there was one about. I just remember this was one about sewers. I like the idea of like alligators in the sewers, alligators in the French sewers, and there is a game out there I think now with that, or one came out at some point. But it was something where I just like the idea of like rats versus alligators in the sewers of Paris. I like looked for all these maps of sewers of Paris. When I was in Paris, I skipped the Louvre because it was like crazy packed. And I went to the sewer museum in Paris. So like, I've been in the Paris sewers, so I thought it was cool. I mean, I was standing over like grates of like, you know, Paris merde is like beneath me, you know? And I just couldn't find anything in it to like where it was fun for me. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't anything in it for me where I just thought this is worth doing. Like, do I block off the water? Do I do this? Like everything that I ran into with that game was just kind of like, you know, so I just stopped. That was one. Oh, there's another one. Like I like the idea of like in Old Maid, you know, is the idea that like, God forbid you be an unmarried woman. Oh, the worst. And so I thought, I mean, okay, that's my never again. But anyway, it's fine. Love in my heart for everyone. But anyway, so I wanted to take Old Maid and turn it into a game where when you're like making partners and stuff like that, to put people in the position where they're really using women as like, you know, chattel, you know, like as financial capital to like secure alliances and all this other stuff. But it was, I think, one of those things where like my idea may be so heavy handed that like with the lightness of the game that I was doing, like there's probably an answer in there somewhere, but I just couldn't make it work. So there usually has to be something that I'm really into thematically about a game, but my favorite game period from a design standpoint is Survive Escape from Atlantis, the classic game, because to me, it is mechanically and thematically so perfectly intertwined with everything that you do makes sense in terms of the story. And everyone knows that whales smash boats, not people, and sharks eat people, not boats, and sea monsters smash everything, but they're really, really slow. Like everything in that game to me makes total sense. And I actually got to talk with Jeff Engelstein about it for a while because he did the space attack version of it. And when we were talking, he said, you know, it's so interesting. He said, because he had mentioned to Stephen Bonacore that there should be a different, you know, like a spaceship version. And the idea they had for their space attack version was totally different. But he said the thing that they found was when they were working with Survive, the game is so tight in terms of how well everything works together. If they like changed anything thematically, like the whole thing would fall apart. Like it just was like, it's that well designed of a game. I mean, not a perfect game. There's a lot of things in there that people don't like. Everything from, you know, people are valued differently to all kinds of other things. But I really love that thematic and mechanical integration. And so if I can have in a game where, I mean, a lot of my games involve like interesting spatial things. Like, I mean, Ragnarok, which is what Dirty Birdie is now called now, is, you know, like, you know, you've got like a village and your dragon's like burning everything to down. It's like, you know, Daenerys, the game, basically. So, you know, like, so that's like a visual spatial thing. Crash Course, or what's now I think called Grease Lightning, the new game I just signed. That one has a modular circular board, so the racetrack changes. Valkyrie is a tile laying game with different pathways. I'm a very visual person, so a lot of my games have a very strong like visual component to it. So it's like if I can't see it in my head and I can't really see what would make this interesting, like as far as to play around with, then that's when things tend to go bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For me, like I've gotten ideas that I'm like super excited about and I really want to make, but if I can't make the prototype, then it's never gonna go anywhere. Like for whatever like roadblock I have in the whole like going from idea to prototype. But like I never actually like scrap any ideas. It's just I have ideas I haven't made into games yet.
Yeah, I just have like because every now and then I would like I'll go back and look at my folder, you know, on my Google Drive of like all the different like kind of like fits and starts kind of ideas and stuff like that. There's actually a game, the idea that one thing that's been actually really cool is I got on the list of for Ravensburger for all their IP games. And it's basically, here's what we are looking for. Here's all the IPs. And they've got a process where basically you submit an idea for a game. And if they like it, they have you make a proof of concept. If they like it, then, you know, you just like it's stages that you go through to do this. But they make it very clear, like you own, you know, we own the IPs. These are your games. And if we don't sign your game, then, you know, it's yours. You can't have the IP, obviously, but you can solve the game and the mechanics and all that other stuff. And so there was one on there that something that I, you know, like I had never seen, but, you know, was omnipresent in popular culture. And I thought, okay, this is really the time to do it. And so I watched the thing and came up with something that I'm really, really happy with. And it's something that if they don't bite on this, like this is one that I want to do. And this is, and I think that's the thing too with Valkyrie, because Valkyrie was really like the most mechanics first design that I've ever done. You know, Crash Course is kind of in between. Ragnarok / Dirty Birdie was definitely theme first. So this one, like, I have a lot more confidence in terms of looking at games from a mechanical perspective. And so, so that's one that I'm really excited about just playing around with because it's a much bigger game than what I normally do. It's more player driven instead of board driven. But I think that's just kind of fun and cool in the like evolution of just being a designer.
Yeah. Jennifer asked, do you find yourself designing games for one particular audience, or have you designed games for different audiences?
I mean, generally speaking, since students are my number one play testers, most of my games are designed to be played in 45 minutes with students because that's how long our classes are, ideally. So generally speaking, I mean, and there's some things like, especially since I want my students to experience all different types of mechanics, if I could find a really good worker placement game that plays in 45 minutes or less, like Carcassonne kind of is. And by the way, Carcassonne they think is so boring because of the theme, but Star Wars Carcassonne, if you've ever played it, is great. I love Carcassonne. And Star Wars Carcassonne takes out the farms, and it's got a really fun battle mechanic with dice. It's really simple, but the nice thing is, especially for new players, you don't have to worry about trying to explain farms and how that works and all that other stuff. It's like so tactical. Like you know, you do the like scoring of incomplete stuff at the end of the game, but basically, since there's no like hidden invisible scoring that new players don't get with farms, like you can see how well you're doing as clearly as possible in that game. So if you've never tried Star Wars Carcassonne, it's great. But generally speaking, I try like a lot of my games, or at least used to be, like things I could play in like 45 minutes because that's who I can play test with for sure. But yeah, but now it's like, now I'm just starting to branch out more and more. Mm-hmm.
I would say it's about the same for me. Like, I like to design games that are like 45 minutes because that's my attention span. But like most of my games, like when I started out, were just games that I would like. But now I've ventured into more different types of games.
Yeah, well, it's like with RPGs, because I like to run RPGs, but the one that I'd made a homebrew version. If you're familiar with the Lady Blackbird RPG, it's a one-shot free PDF. It's like minimal prep. You could run it for one session. You could run it for, you know, weeks, whatever. But I made a Harry Potter version of it. But it's funny, like each one of my adventures, or like when I run sessions, so it's like cinema length, like 2 hours, maybe a little bit more than that. But like there's no epic 6 hour long, you know, like nightly sessions. It's like I don't have the time. I don't have the attention span for, like when I play D&D and stuff with my guy group, you know, it's like I bring lots of snacks. I try to hide my phone. You know, I hate combat. I think it's really boring. You know, like, oh, look, I hit. Oh, look, I didn't hit. Feels the same to me, honestly. So, so yeah, I'm with you. Like, you know, your attention span matters when it comes to games. Because that's the thing too, is, I mean, when you design longer games, it is harder to get those play tested. You know, if you've got a half an hour, 45-minute game, cool, people will give you an hour. If you've got a game, when you say I've got a prototype, it's going to take about 2 hours to play through, people are like, oh dear God, please let this be somewhat okay. Or I'm looking at 2 hours. And don't be afraid to, like, you know, pull games. You know, once you get the information you need, don't have people play it out unless they want to. I've had people say, no, can we finish playing? I'm like, yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, I'm okay, yeah, sure, whatever, you know. But, you know, just, yeah, because, yeah, that's the one thing, is this game that I'm thinking of in my head is going to be a bigger, longer game, most likely. And that's okay. But it just means that you have to factor in all those other, you know, real life problems when it comes to actually getting them play tested. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've definitely gone like the shorter game route, because like after having a game that took like an hour and a half to play, and then going down to like a half an hour, and then having a game that took 15 minutes, it's like, whoa, the 15-minute game I can play like 4 times in an hour with the same people and get so much feedback and like do a change in between. Like,
well, and if you're giving me an hour and a half long game, I want an hour and a half of game. You know, I mean, I've started this, you know, playing some more war games and stuff like that. And those are definitely like, you know, Sekigahara, I play that one on Yucatan. That's about 3 hours, you know. And, you know, for me, you know, if I'm going to play 3 hours in one game, like I want there to be 3 hours of game. I don't want it to be where it's busy work until you get to a point where things start to get interesting, you know. And that's really, really hard. And, you know, to create that. So, what was the question? I'm sorry. About Ravensburger?
Yeah. Jack asked, is the Ravensburger IP listing somewhat public, or do you have to apply whatever?
No, it is definitely not public. So I don't know how they're going to add designers to their stable, because generally speaking, like at BGG Con, because I met Mike Mulvihill and we hung out, and so it was cool. And so we ended up talking about the whole process and all that other stuff. I mean, because you'll sign an NDA and all that. And I don't know, I mean, if they're just going to have like, you know, I would say contact them and say, hey, listen, you know, I'm a designer, I'm interested in working for it. You'll sign an NDA, you'll get, like, they put out like a quarterly list of stuff. So I would check with them and see, but the thing is, I also, the first time that I inquired about it was at Gen Con, I think last year. And I went up to their booth. They weren't there. I left my name. I said I was interested. I never heard a thing from it. And that's the thing, because, you know, even though they have this list, you know, they can't just give it out like candy, you know. But also, if you know what games are on the shelf put out by Ravensburger, they have some really big IPs, you know. I mean, Villainous, hello, you know. So so they've got, so I like having, like I said, being a design constraints person, I very much like, even if they don't pick up any of my games, I like that just the list has inspired so many different ideas for myself that I'm excited to see where they go. Yeah. So I would say is if you're not on the Ravensburger list, BFD, pick a movie you like and make a game about it. Give yourself your own design constraints. Everything that I'm talking about, are things that, should do on your own, I mean, it's like with the international, codes, code signals, for each flag, there's a different letter, but the flags also have different meanings. Like I require a tug, or I am leaking dangerous cargo. These are used by ships to communicate to each other, right? So there's got to be, my battery's going low, but I think we're going to be able to beat it. Let's see. 14 minutes. I'm cool. So, I think, like it's the challenge of finding the game as much as like, the games. Like I don't care about the money. I don't care about, like that. Don't go into board games if you do care about money. That's for darn sure. But I want to get my name on a box on the shelf more than anything. There's ego there, and that's 100% true. But just figure out like design constraints. Like what is the worst possible thing for you to make? Do it. See what happens. Love the things you hate and hate the things you love. Because the more you can put yourself in completely different perspectives, the better of a designer you will be.
So
IMHO.
So Jack had one question. Are there games you enjoy playing but you find you're bad at designing, and vice versa, games you're bad at but good at designing?
If it's an economic game or an auction game, well, I could design. No. I'm not a math person, and so even when something is really like crunchy numbery, like I could spend the time to figure out. The thing is, I think in pictures. I'm incredibly visual, so if there's a lot of calculations that I have to do, what I do mentally, which I didn't realize I did this. I just thought everybody did this, but I basically have to convert everything into a 3D model. I do the manipulation of the 3D model in my head. I convert it back to numbers, and then I do the calculation. I didn't realize that's why it took me so long to do math. I didn't realize because algebra was just like nightmarish for me. Geometry I could do without the book, So if there's something that requires lots of calculations, I've played one 18xx game and I will not play another one because it's not fun for me. It's not fun for me at all to because I can do it, or if I have a calculator, but I don't think that's the point, And so that's something I would probably never touch. Just because I think there's a lot of balancing and that's not for me. What was the other question? Like a type of game that I would want to design?
Games you're bad at but good at designing.
Well, I'm just always kind of surprising myself lately. I'm getting better at designing games. I've always called myself sort of like a hedge witch or amateur plus when it comes to game design. But it's more like, but the thing is for me is I teach gifted kids and I create all my own content. And so my great challenge is how can I make them struggle and have fun at the same time? It's like a game in of itself, right? And I've done this long enough where I'm pretty good, where if I have 15 minutes, I can come up with something interesting for my students to do. It won't necessarily work out perfectly the first time, but after I have the first group do it, then I'm gonna make the changes for the next group. So every single day of what I do is literally play testing my own designs. And just most of the time it's in a classroom, not necessarily on the table. And so I have a lot of confidence in my ability to create things, maybe not the perfect thing the first time, but that doesn't bother me because I do imperfect things all the time. And so because of the whole fail fast and don't take it personally and just pick up and go, because I've done that for so long, that's one of the reasons why I think I have been successful in some ways, is because I'm used to doing that. As an instructor, what am I looking for game balance? Well, with my students, I don't even worry about balance because their games are so bad, honestly, because this is the first time they've ever designed anything. They're in 7th grade, when you ask kids, why did you make this? They're like, well, I've never played a game about space before, so I thought it'd be pretty fun if I made one, right? So as far as that goes, is for me, the big thing is I want them to feel very cool and very smart that they came up with something that they're excited about. That's what I care about with students. I teach game design to students to get them to learn how they work, to learn how to work hard, to work through problems, to help them collaborate more with other people. It's not really about it's about the games. They do make games and they make some pretty good ones too. But do that. As far as balance is tricky, it just basically, I don't know that there's I said, this is the point I want to design to, but especially when you're just play testing a game a lot and where it needs to end up. And it's just something I think that for me is something that I have to determine organically. I don't know if that answers the question though. Yeah. I mean, it's fun though. I mean, it's like, I like having problems to solve. And if I don't have problems to solve, I create problems for myself to solve. So it is better that I design games than rob banks.
Well,
because I don't know that the bank tellers are all washing their hands right now, and that scares me. So there's that. Just kidding. I think banks are all closed. Let's hope that don't bring that up. Anything else?
Jennifer also asked, there's so much with game balance. How do you approach it?
I think it just comes from like, what feels right. I guess the one example from Valkyrie. So Valkyries could choose who fought in the field of battle. They could choose who were slain, and they made tapestries out of the bodies of the dead. And that's what you're doing in my game. All the Vikings are colored different colors, and you're trying to put different colors together and basically do a like color by number, fill in the tapestry with their little dead bodies. It's pretty awesome. But the thing is getting the balance to be, because you get points for, having the filling your tapestry, but you also get points for creating runes on the board. It is awesome, Matt. You are not incorrect. It is really good. And, but you actually, the thing that was the biggest surprise in this game, and this was the holy shit, I accidentally lucked into something good, was because of how the tiles are designed, you can actually create Norse runes on the board. You can form, Yes, Matt Williams, I see your face. That was my face too. And that's when I realized, oh my God, this game has gone from something that's like a cool idea to this is like a thing. This is like a real thing that is a thing. And so getting the balance right between points for runes versus points for tapestries, because I had some variants where it made way more sense to make a ton of runes, and I had some where it made way more sense just to get a lot of Vikings on the board. But the moment that actually helped me more than anything was a friend who's a really into mythology and knows Norse mythology, knows, can write in runes, whatever. Anyway, he said, because I had 10 points was for the game, he's like, no, 9. 9 is the number for Valkyrie. 9 is only the number of Valkyrie. I'm like, thank God. I now know what the final score is going to be. Now I just have to figure out what's the right formula to get it there. And so I finally do a lot of play testing and getting it finally it's like how a dog. Okay. I learned this in 7th grade when I brought a police drug dog into my classroom because my mom was friends with this cop who had a drug dog. And the cop, and this is, of course, because I'm 44 years old, back in the day, the cop brought in some drugs because you could do that back then. And he hid him in the classroom. And the dog went to find the drugs. And what I did, and so scent emits in cones. So